Who was Muhammad, and how do we know? I'm Aisha Musa of AIM Education and Consulting. In these videos, we'll be looking closely at the sources of information on the life of the Prophet Muhammad in order to see how we know what we know about Muhammad. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put a link to Patreon in the description for the video. We covered the basics of sources and how to access them in an earlier video. You'll find a link to that video in the description below. Now let's take a look at the general information that's shared across both primary and secondary sources. Secondary sources, like those we discussed in the previous video, take their information from primary sources. In this video, we'll begin to talk about those primary sources. We'll look at the Quran and Hadith as primary sources in upcoming videos. In this video, we'll begin to talk about Muslim biographies and histories, which is where authors of secondary sources get most of their information on the life of Muhammad. Whether these texts are considered primary or secondary sources depends on how they are being used and by whom. Academic scholars and Muslim religious scholars have different criteria for what constitutes a primary source. Muslim histories from later generations that describe the time of the Prophet are secondary sources when they're used by academic scholars to answer questions about the time of the Prophet. When they are used to answer questions about what Muslims living at the time the histories were written believed about the time of the Prophet, they're primary sources. For Muslim religious scholars, chains of narrators are a major criterion for identifying and authenticating sources. Stories attributed to the companions of the Prophet and passed on through reliable narrators are considered eyewitness accounts and thus primary sources. We'll look more closely at chains of narrators in upcoming videos.
Ibn Ishaq's Sirat Rasulullah, Tabari's Tarikh, and Ibn al-Jawzi's Muntadam are just a few examples of early Muslim histories and biographies. Like modern secondary sources, early Muslim histories and biographies generally treat Muhammad's life chronologically, beginning with his birth and childhood, followed by his marriage to his first wife Khadija before receiving revelation, his receipt of revelation, the 12 years of his mission in Mecca, and the 11 years of his mission in Medina. For each of these periods, there are key details of Muhammad's life that are repeated across the sources. Let's take a look at those details now. Sources report that Muhammad was born in what the Arabs refer to as the Year of the Elephant. This corresponds to approximately 570 of the Common Era. Muhammad was born in the city of Mecca, into the Hashim clan of the Quraysh tribe. The Quraysh were the largest and most powerful Arab tribe, and they controlled the Kaaba, the center of worship for the Arabs. Muhammad's father, Abdullah, reportedly died before Muhammad was born, leaving him an orphan in the Arab culture. His mother died when he was just 6 years old, leaving him in the care of his paternal grandfather. Muhammad's grandfather died when Muhammad was 8 years old, leaving him in the care of his paternal uncle, Abu Talib. Abu Talib was leader of the Quraysh and a well-known merchant. As an adolescent, Muhammad reportedly accompanied Abu Talib on trade caravans to Syria. Following in his uncle's footsteps, Muhammad became a merchant and was known for his honesty and business acumen. This brought him to the attention of a wealthy widow named Khadija, who hired him to manage her caravans. Her caravans did so well under Muhammad's management that Khadija was impressed enough by his character and skill to propose marriage. Muhammad accepted and they were married when he was 25 and Khadija was 40. Until her death 25 years later, she was Muhammad's only wife. During this time, idolatry is said to have troubled Muhammad greatly, and he was in the habit of going to meditate in a cave in the hills outside Mecca. During one of these meditations, in 610 of the Common Era, when Muhammad was 40, he was reportedly overcome by a crushing sensation and a voice commanding him, "Read." Muhammad's response was, "I don't read." The voice again commanded, "Read," and the crushing sensation was stronger. This happened 3 times before Muhammad said, "What shall I read?" And the voice continued, "Read in the name of your Lord who created." This is considered the first revelation of the Quran and is currently the opening of chapter 96. Revelation continued gradually, a few verses at a time, over the next 23 years of Muhammad's life, until shortly before his death in 632 of the Common Era. For the next 3 years, Muhammad preached only privately to his closest friends and family. After 3 years, he began to preach publicly, denouncing the idolatry of his people and calling on the polytheistic Meccans to submit to the one true God of Abraham. He preached publicly in Mecca for the next 9 years, but few people accepted his message, and he and his followers endured severe persecution. Some 250 miles north of the city of Mecca was the oasis city of Yathrib. The feuding tribes of Yathrib offered Muhammad and his followers safe haven if Muhammad would come there to be a judge in their disputes. Muhammad accepted, and in 622 of the Common Era fled from Mecca, narrowly escaping assassination. Muhammad's Meccan followers gradually migrated to Yathrib as well. It was in Yathrib that Muhammad established a successful community, and the city came to be known as Medinat an-Nebi, literally the city of the prophet, now known simply as Medina. Medina remained Muhammad's political capital even after the successful conquest of Mecca in 630 of the Common Era. Muhammad died and was buried in Medina in 632.
What we've just gone over is an outline of the generally accepted narrative of Muhammad's life. This narrative is shared across primary and secondary sources. In future videos, we'll look more deeply at the primary sources themselves. Before looking at the texts themselves, it's important to understand how these texts are dated. Muslims date the Islamic era from the year that Muhammad emigrated from Mecca to Medina in 622 CE. That is our Common Era. Muhammad's emigration is called the Hijra in Arabic. The years from the Hijra and beyond are called Hijri years. In Latin, this is Anno Hijri, abbreviated AH. 622 CE is 1 AH. Texts are usually dated according to the year in which the author or compiler died. This is done because often authors didn't explicitly state in their texts when they were written.
Here's the timeline that gives a general idea of when the various written sources emerged in relation to Muhammad's life and mission, as reported in those sources. Finally, here's a list of the references used in this video, along with links where you can find them on archive.org.
Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video helpful and informative. Please put any questions or thoughts you may have in the comments section.